Jason Momoa and Lisa Bonet calling it quits after 16 years together. All right, so here's the big question. Were there signs of trouble in paradise?
When Hollywood's most beautiful couple announced they were parting ways, the world braced for a meltdown. The tears, the tabloid war, the dramatic reinvention, the rebound romance splashed across every magazine. That is the script we have all come to expect. But Lisa Bonet did something nobody saw coming. She did absolutely none of it. No social media confessionals, no bitter interviews, no public spiral. Instead, the woman who once played America's favorite TV daughter simply vanished further into the quiet, soulful, off-the-grid life she had been building for decades. The girl who did not fit anywhere. To understand the woman Lisa Bonet became, you have to start with a child who never felt like she belonged. She was born Lisa Michelle Bonet on the 16th of November, 1967, in San Francisco, California. Her mother, Arlene Littman, was a Jewish-American schoolteacher. Her father, Alan Bonet, was a black opera singer from Texas. Her parents separated when she was just a baby, and Lisa was raised by her single mother in the middle-class Los Angeles neighborhood of Reseda. Her father essentially disappeared from her life. He went on to remarry and have many more children, and Lisa, by her own account, never really knew him. So from the very beginning, she was a mixed-race girl growing up without a father, caught between two worlds and fully accepted by neither. She has spoken about this with painful honesty over the years. At her high school in the San Fernando Valley, she felt stuck in the middle. As she once put it, the black kids called her an Oreo, and the white kids did not talk to her at all. She did not date. She worried about who would even take her to the prom. This was not the glamorous origin story of a future star. This was a lonely, in-between childhood, and it planted something in her that would define her entire life. A deep, unshakable need to find out who she really was, on her own terms, without anyone else's permission. There was a real ache underneath all of this. Lisa has talked about how much she longed for a bigger family, for brothers and sisters, for a sense of belonging that her quiet household with her single mother could not quite give her. She was close to her mother, who she has described as a good woman who loved her deeply. But the absence of her father and the feeling of being an outsider everywhere she went left a hole in her that she spent years trying to understand. That kind of childhood does one of two things to a person. It either crushes them, or it forges in them a fierce independence and a hunger to build a life and a family entirely on their own terms. For Lisa, it was the second. Acting became her escape, a place where the girl who fit nowhere could step into someone else's skin and finally feel something click. She started young, appearing in commercials and small television parts as a child, and she trained seriously at an acting studio in North Hollywood, honing a craft that gave her both a refuge and a voice. She auditioned constantly, and as a young teenager, she started landing small roles and guest spots on various series. She was talented, she was luminous on camera, and she was hungry. And then, at just 16 years old, she walked into an audition that would change the course of her life and lock her into an image she would spend the next 40 years trying to escape. America's Daughter. In 1984, Lisa Bonet was cast as Denise Huxtable on The Cosby Show, and almost overnight, she became one of the most recognized young faces in America. The Cosby Show was not just a hit, it was a cultural earthquake. At a time when television was starved for great sitcoms, this portrait of a warm, successful, loving black family struck a chord with tens of millions of viewers every single week. It dominated the ratings, sitting at #1 for years, and it made household names of its young cast. Lisa, as the dreamy, free-spirited second daughter Denise, was adored. She earned an Emmy nomination. She was, by any measure, a star. But here is the thing about Lisa Bonet. While the whole country fell in love with wholesome Denise Huxtable, Lisa herself was already restless inside that golden cage. Fame had arrived fast, maybe too fast, for a young woman who had spent her childhood feeling like an outsider. And the role that made her famous was a sweet, sanitized, all-American teenager, which was not at all who Lisa felt she was underneath. Most young actors in her position would have happily ridden that wave for as long as it lasted. Lisa did the opposite. She started pushing against the very image that had made her famous. She wanted to be seen as an artist, not a product. She wanted to take risks, explore darker and stranger and more grown-up material. She dreamed of movies, of bigger and bolder challenges, even of her own spin-off, where she could stretch creatively. But that restlessness put her on a collision course with what America wanted her to be. The public had decided Lisa Bonet was sweet Denise Huxtable, the perfect TV daughter, and they did not want her to be anything else. That tension between who she actually was and who the world insisted she be would shape the next several years of her life. And in 1987, she made a choice so bold it sent a shockwave through her wholesome public image. A choice that announced to the world that Lisa Bonet was nobody's good little TV daughter. The role that broke the image. The film was called Angel Heart. It was a dark, disturbing psychological horror thriller directed by Alan Parker, and it starred Mickey Rourke and Robert De Niro. And Lisa Bonet, fresh off playing the squeaky clean Denise Huxtable, took a role that could not have been more different. Her character was involved in a graphic, unsettling, intensely adult storyline, including a sex scene so explicit that a few seconds of it had to be edited out just to avoid the dreaded X rating when the film was released in 1987. For audiences who knew Lisa only as the gentle teenager from a beloved family sitcom, it was genuinely shocking. There was an uproar. People felt she was tarnishing the wholesome character they loved. And Lisa Bonet, barely out of her teens, did not flinch. She was not interested in protecting the reputation of a fictional character. She was interested in her own growth as an artist and as a person. She saw acting as a real craft, one that demanded risk and honesty, and she was willing to face criticism to prove she was more than a familiar, comfortable face. The performance even earned her real critical recognition, including an award nomination, proof that the gamble was not just rebellion for its own sake, but a genuine artistic leap. It is a small moment in some ways, one provocative film role, but it tells you everything about who she is. Even at 19, she was already willing to burn down the public's expectations of her in order to stay true to herself. She would rather be misunderstood as herself than adored as someone else. That fearless independence would soon spill out of her career and into her personal life, in a romance so sudden and so intense that it would derail her career, end her time on television, and produce a daughter who would one day become a star in her own right. A whirlwind, an elevator, and Lenny Kravitz. In the mid-1980s, Lisa Bonet met a young, then unknown musician named Lenny Kravitz, reportedly crossing paths at a concert. The connection was instant and electric. They became friends, then roommates, then something much more. And on Lisa's 20th birthday, the 16th of November, 1987, the two of them eloped in Las Vegas. It was pure, impulsive, young love, and it had immediate consequences for her career. By this point, Lisa had moved over to a different world, the Cosby Show spin-off that was built around her character, Denise, heading off to college. But then Lisa became pregnant with Lenny's child, and the show's powerful creator, Bill Cosby, flatly refused to write her real-life pregnancy into the storyline. The producer, Debbie Allen, reportedly tried to convince him to let the character be pregnant, framing it as a meaningful story about a young woman navigating new motherhood. Cosby would not budge. The message was blunt. Denise Huxtable was not pregnant. Lisa Bonet was pregnant. And so Lisa left the spin-off. On the 1st of December, 1988, she gave birth to a daughter, Zoe Kravitz, a name that fans today instantly recognize because Zoe grew up to become a major Hollywood star herself. And motherhood, by Lisa's own account, changed her at the deepest level. She has said that having Zoe essentially saved her life, that becoming a mother made her determined to break certain patterns and not pass on her own pain to her child. But the fairy tale marriage to Kravitz did not last. They separated in 1991 and divorced in 1993. The reasons were kept private, but the heartbreak was not. Kravitz, by all accounts, was devastated, and he poured that pain directly into his music, writing an entire album steeped in the ache of losing her. For years afterward, fans would hear the echoes of Lisa in his most famous songs. The young couple who had eloped on her birthday in a burst of pure romance had burned bright and burned out, both of them barely into their 20s, both of them figuring out who they were while the whole world watched. But for Lisa, that ending was not just a divorce. It was the beginning of the most important transformation of her entire life, and it is the part of her story that the world is only now learning to appreciate. The day she stopped being Lisa Bonet. Here is a fact about Lisa Bonet that most people, even longtime fans, do not know, and it may be the single most revealing detail in her entire life. In 1993, the same year she divorced Lenny Kravitz, Lisa Bonet legally changed her name. She became, on paper, Lilikoi Moon. She kept the name Lisa Bonet only for her professional acting work, but in her real private life, the name her parents gave her, the name that had been plastered across television screens and tabloids for a decade, was gone. She chose a new one for herself. Think about what that means. At the very moment her fame was at a complicated peak, she quietly stepped out of her own celebrity identity and renamed herself, a private act of reinvention that almost nobody noticed at the time. This was 1993, not 2022. The so-called transformation that everyone is talking about now did not begin with her split from Jason Momoa. It began more than 30 years ago, with a young divorced mother deciding she would define herself completely on her own terms. And she backed that name change up with a whole new way of living. She moved out of the heart of celebrity Los Angeles and toward a more natural, grounded life, eventually settling in the canyon country, choosing dirt and trees and quiet over red carpets and flashbulbs. She has described that move as a kind of retreat from a world she felt she had been thrown into far too young, before she was ready to handle it. It was a conscious decision to slow down, to step out of the machine, to protect both herself and her child from a fame she had never fully wanted. And she raised her daughter Zoe with a fierce, deliberate intention. By many accounts, the household had no internet. The television stayed unplugged except for weekend movie rentals, and the family ate a clean, plant-based diet. Music was always playing. The whole environment was designed to nurture imagination and creativity, rather than feed off screens and noise. She was, decades before it became fashionable, building a life of intentional simplicity, spirituality, and privacy. While other celebrity parents chased visibility, Lisa was quietly building a fortress of normalcy around her daughter. And it worked. Zoe grew up grounded, creative, and eventually became a celebrated actress in her own right, carrying her mother's same air of effortless, unbothered cool. This is the woman who would, more than a decade later, meet Jason Momoa. So by the time that famous romance began, Lisa Bonet had already become Lilikoi Moon. She already knew exactly who she was, which makes the story of her great love and its eventual end very different from the one the tabloids like to tell. The quiet years and a return. Through the 90s, Lisa stepped back from the spotlight in a big way. She has been candid that she simply was not working much, that she had chosen a different way of living, focused on raising her daughter, doing a lot of thinking, and a lot of yoga. For an actress who had been famous since 16, deliberately disappearing was almost unheard of, but it was completely consistent with who she had become. When she did drift back toward acting at the end of the decade, she did it on her own terms, taking roles that interested her rather than chasing stardom. She appeared in the 1998 thriller Enemy of the State alongside Will Smith, playing a former flame of his character, and then in the acclaimed 2000 film High Fidelity. She picked up television and film work here and there over the following years, appearing in projects like Biker Boys and later television roles, never overexposing herself, never grasping at fame. Acting became something she did, not something she was. She would surface for a role that spoke to her, then disappear back into her private world, completely uninterested in the relentless self-promotion that drives most Hollywood careers. In an industry built on visibility, she treated her own absence as a feature, not a flaw. And through all of it, she maintained the friendships and the values that grounded her. Her close friend, the actress Marisa Tomei, became godmother to her children, a bond that has lasted for decades. She kept an unusually warm relationship with her ex-husband, Lenny Kravitz, the two of them co-parenting Zoe with real grace, showing up for their daughter together long after the romance had ended. This ability to keep the people she loved close, even after the romance ended, even after the marriage failed, would become one of the defining features of her life. And it was about to be tested by the most famous relationship she would ever have. The childhood crush who became her husband. The story of how Lisa Bonet met Jason Momoa is the kind of thing that sounds made up, because Jason Momoa had been in love with Lisa Bonet since he was a little boy. Momoa has told the story many times. As a young child in the 1980s, he saw Lisa Bonet on television and turned to his mother and declared that he wanted that one. She was his earliest celebrity crush, a childhood dream. He was also more than a decade younger than her, and then, around 2005, fate intervened. The two of them happened to meet at a jazz club in Los Angeles. The story goes that Momoa needed a ride home, and Lisa gave him one. That was it. The childhood crush met the real woman, and a profound, lasting connection was born. They became a couple, built a life, and had two children together. A daughter named Lola, born in 2007, and a son named Nakoa Wolf, born in 2008. Momoa lovingly helped raise Zoe as well, and the whole blended family, including Lenny Kravitz, became famous for their warmth and closeness. It was genuinely unusual in Hollywood, an ex-husband, a new husband, and a tightly bonded set of kids all folded into one big, loving, unconventional clan. Momoa and Kravitz reportedly became close themselves, two very different men united by their love for the same remarkable woman and the children they shared between them. For years they were not just together, they were Hollywood's ultimate symbol of soulmate love. The rugged action star utterly devoted to his free-spirited, bohemian goddess of a wife. Momoa never hid how completely he adored her. He spoke about her in interviews with a kind of awe, the boy who had dreamed of her finally living a life beside her. They built homes, raised their kids close to nature, and seemed to embody a kind of authentic, earthy, anti-Hollywood love that millions of people found deeply aspirational. They finally made it official and married in October of 2017, after more than a decade together. For a while, it looked unbreakable, which is exactly why what happened next stunned so many people. But the truth of their split, when you actually look at it, is not a scandal at all. It is something far quieter and far more mature. The split that refused to be a scandal. In January of 2022, Lisa Bonet and Jason Momoa announced they were separating. The statement they shared was unlike any celebrity breakup announcement anyone had seen. It spoke of transformational times, of seismic shifts, of freeing each other to become who they were learning to become. It was poetic, gentle, and full of love rather than blame. And then came a detail that revealed just how private these two people really were. The announcement in 2022 was not actually when they separated. Court documents would later show that the couple had quietly separated back in October of 2020, more than a year before they ever told the public. They had processed the hardest part of their breakup completely out of view, protecting their children and themselves from the spotlight while they figured things out. While the world still believed they were the perfect couple, They had already been quietly navigating the end of their marriage for over a year, refusing to turn their private pain into public entertainment. When they finally did speak, they said they were sharing the news not because they thought it was anyone's business, but so that they could go about their lives with dignity and honesty. Even in heartbreak, they were determined to do it their own way. The formal divorce did not even begin until January of 2024, when Bonet officially filed, citing irreconcilable differences. It was finalized that summer on the 9th of July 2024, and it was about as peaceful as a divorce can be. They agreed to share custody of their 2 children. Neither one asked the other for a penny of spousal support. They had already sorted out their assets between themselves before the paperwork was even filed. There was no war, no bitterness, no tabloid mudslinging. So what actually pulled them apart? By the accounts of people close to them, it was not betrayal or drama. It was simply 2 people growing in different directions. Momoa, after years of struggling to find steady work, had exploded into a massive movie star with Aquaman and Game of Thrones, and he was hungry to seize every opportunity, which meant constant travel and long stretches away from home. After spending so long fighting for his break, he was not about to slow down now that it had finally arrived, and you can hardly blame him for that. Lisa, on the other hand, wanted exactly what she had always wanted: to stay rooted in Los Angeles, close to home and family, to read, to write poetry, to cook, to live quietly. One of them wanted to go out and conquer the world. The other had spent 30 years learning that her whole world was at home. Neither of them was wrong. They simply wanted different things, and they had reached a point in life where pretending otherwise would have cost them both their happiness. They still loved each other. They just wanted different lives. And both of them were mature enough to admit it without destroying each other in the process. Which brings us to the transformation everyone keeps talking about: the change in Lisa Bonet since the split. Except, when you really look closely, you start to realize the truth about it. The transformation that was not a transformation. Since the divorce, Lisa Bonet has become the subject of endless fascination. People marvel at how radiant she looks, how peaceful she seems, how completely she has refused to follow the usual celebrity breakup playbook. They call it her stunning transformation. But here is the secret. She did not transform after leaving Jason Momoa. She just kept being exactly who she has been for over 30 years. Look at the so-called evidence of her reinvention, and you will see it is all just Lisa being Lisa. People point to her wellness and her youthful glow, her devotion to movement. And yes, she has spoken about a beloved African dance class she has done for years, something she stumbled upon and fell in love with and kept up faithfully, along with her regular practice of yoga and Pilates and staying active. Friends say she seems more radiant and energized than ever. But that is not a post-divorce makeover. That is a woman who has prioritized her body and spirit for decades, who built her entire adult life around natural living long before wellness became a billion-dollar industry. The glow people are marveling at is not a secret treatment or a dramatic change. It is just what 3 decades of intentional, grounded living looks like on a person who was never chasing anyone's approval in the first place. People point to her complete absence from social media, her refusal to live through a phone, her preference for real-world connection with her children over digital validation. But again, this is the same woman who raised Zoe in a house with no internet in the 1990s. Her rejection of digital culture is not a new statement. It is a 30-year-old way of life. People point to her stepping back from Hollywood, her focus on pottery, poetry, nature, and spiritual practice. But Lisa Bonet has been stepping back from Hollywood on and off since she was in her 20s. She has never needed the industry to feel whole. And maybe most tellingly, people are stunned that she has stayed on good terms with everyone, that she, Jason Momoa, and Lenny Kravitz all reportedly maintain a warm, respectful, blended family for the sake of the children. But this is precisely what she did with Kravitz 30 years ago. Keeping love alive after romance ends is not her new trick. It is her oldest one. This is why her transformation is causing such a stir. Not because she changed, but because in a culture obsessed with reinvention, revenge, and oversharing, Lisa Bonet has shown everyone what it looks like to already know exactly who you are. In an age of constant noise, her quiet is the most radical thing in the room. She did not need a breakup to find herself, because she found herself a long, long time ago. The woman who won by walking away. When you step back and look at the whole arc of Lisa Bonet's life, the real story snaps into focus. And it is so much richer than a tabloid headline about a glow-up. This is a woman who started as a lonely, mixed-race kid who fit in nowhere, who was handed overwhelming fame at 16 and immediately understood that the wholesome image attached to it was a trap, who risked her entire reputation to prove she was an artist and not a product, who, in the middle of a painful divorce, literally renamed herself and rebuilt her entire existence around privacy, family, and meaning instead of fame, who raised one daughter into a star and helped raise a whole blended family with uncommon grace, who found a great love, lived it fully, and then ended it with dignity instead of drama. She has spent her whole life quietly refusing to be what other people wanted her to be. The free spirit was never an act. The bohemian goddess was never a marketing image. It was just the truth of who Lilikoi Moon always was, underneath the famous name and the famous face. And maybe that is the real lesson buried in her story. In a world that constantly tells us to reinvent ourselves, to chase the next version of who we should be, here is a woman whose entire power came from the opposite. From knowing herself early, holding on to that knowledge through every storm, and simply refusing to let anyone talk her out of it. And maybe that is the real lesson buried in her story. In a world that constantly tells us to reinvent ourselves, to chase the next version of who we should be, to keep upgrading and rebranding and becoming someone shinier, here is a woman whose entire power came from the opposite. From knowing herself early, holding on to that knowledge through every storm, and simply refusing to let anyone talk her out of it. Through the fame, the marriages, the divorces, the decades of being watched and judged and gossiped about, she never once handed over the keys to herself. She never let the public write her story for her. And in the end, that quiet, stubborn loyalty to her own truth turned out to be the most powerful thing about her. More powerful than any role, any romance, or any headline. While the rest of the world kept changing its mind about who Lisa Bonet should be, Lisa Bonet never did. So the next time you see a headline marveling at Lisa Bonet's stunning transformation since leaving Jason Momoa, you will know the deeper truth. She did not transform. She endured. She stayed true to herself across 40 years of fame, 2 marriages, and relentless public attention, and she came out the other side exactly as centered and free as she always intended to be. The stir she is causing is not about a new Lisa Bonet. It is about the rest of us finally understanding the one who was there all along. Lisa Bonet's greatest performance was never on a screen. It was the quiet, decades-long act of becoming herself and refusing to apologize for it. While the world waited for a meltdown, she gave them a masterclass in grace. No drama, no spectacle, just a woman who has always known exactly who she is, walking her own path with her head held high. That is the transformation. That is the stir. If you liked this, hit like and subscribe, and make sure to check out our other videos.